Greetings to the brethren. All right, guys, I'm coming at you today with the first part of my video series revealing something I call the Punchline Technique, which I hereby claim is the greatest deceptive technique known to man. Now, it's going to require a bit of intellectual investment on your part if you really want to understand this, because this was not easy to figure out. I actually started realizing this before I even got reborn because I was studying the CIA, and I noticed that they were kind of doing something sort of like this, and I was looking at it through history. Then I happened to be studying tigers, and I noticed that tigers do something kind of like this with the way that they're able to sneak up on and kill herds of animals, that a herd of animals who are just designed to avoid that one thing, a tiger sneaking up, who have eyes on the sides of their heads so they can see any movement, who, if any of them give a warning sign, all of them run at 100 miles an hour, and yet tigers can sneak up on all these things in broad daylight and eat them. How do they do it? So anyway, I kept thinking about this, and I just started thinking more and more about deception and about how can you deceive someone when you can't take the truth away? What if you're in a position where you can't, because I thought about like the tiger can't become invisible. The tiger can't it can muffle its sounds to some extent, but it can't get rid of the fact that it's a giant blob that's 8 feet long, right? Like how does it do it, right? And I thought more and more about it, and it led me to have this really profound realization about this deception technique. And then I got reborn and started reading the Bible, and it got deeper, because then I realized, dude, Satan uses this deception technique in our whole reality. It's how he gets us to not realize that the gospel is true, and it's how he gets most people into hell. Because realize right now, if you don't already, that the reason people go to hell is not that they're bad people. We're all bad people by the standard of God. The reason people go to hell is because they don't realize that the Bible is true, that the gospel is true. And realize that it's not like most people haven't heard of Jesus. It's not like a lot of people die being like, never heard of the crucifixion. No. Think of all the people dying in most of the world today. They know who Jesus is, whether they know much about him. They've heard of the crucifixion. It's like at the center of all human history. It's not like you go around saying Jesus Christ and people are like, who's that? Right? So people know about the basic idea of the gospel. They just don't believe it. But it's at the center of all human history. And there's all this mountain of evidence on so many levels confirming it's true. So how does Satan get the majority of all human beings to know this and have it at the center of our history and have a book that warns about Satan and tells you about it that everyone knows and has access to, and yet most people die and get tortured eternally because they just don't get it? And the answer is he deceives them. Question is how? How does he do it so well? And that's why I started thinking about this after I got reborn. And I remembered the old punchline technique that I had been obsessed with. That was what I called it as I started studying it. So it took a lot of effort to figure this stuff out. But then just recently, I got it, the final bit of it, which was I realized, it's also how God tricked Satan, and it's how God got Satan to crucify Jesus, because God flipped it back around against Satan and pulled it off against him. Praise the Lord. It's why Satan didn't realize that crucifying Jesus was going to bring about the exact opposite of what Satan wanted. So anyway, you're going to have to bear with me here, because I'm going to describe to you the essence of the technique. And at first, you may not really get it, or you may be like, why would that work? Or like, bear with me. The best I can do is give a bunch of analogies and a bunch of scenarios until it clicks in your mind. And then you get like, I see how it works. And maybe you won't get it. I don't know. Like, look, it's up to the Holy Spirit to reveal stuff. So, if you're curious about it, you're not understanding it, pray to God, reveal to me what Evan is talking about here. Because it wasn't easy to figure this out, and it's going to be seriously challenging here to explain it, but I have some scenarios that will start to try to get it across how this works. Okay. And there's definitely going to have to do these videos in multiple parts. Let me start really quickly with the scripture. 2 Corinthians 2. Let's just jump down to verse 11. Where Paul's talking here, he's saying, I don't want to come to you guys with a bunch of sorrowfulness, because if you guys are the ones that cheer me up and I make you sad, then what good is that? So blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it goes on for a little while, but then we get to this verse and Paul's saying, forgive people, some among you who did certain sin. You don't want them to be overcome by sorrow, and so on. And anyway, we get down to verse 11, and it says, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. And similarly, we see in Matthew 10:16, we see the Lord telling us, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So we're not supposed to just be ignorant of how Satan works. The better we know how Satan works, the better we can avoid how he works. And one of the ways that I was able to confirm the punchline technique is that when you understand how it works, you can look for evidence of it being used. And you'll see it everywhere throughout our whole society. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit of background about it. Okay, so think of deception as like encryption. What is encryption? Encryption is basically when you take like a message and you turn it into unintelligible noise, right? And then you give it to someone, and unless they know the key, they don't know how to reverse it back into a legible message, right? Typical way would be like if you had a message and you changed each letter into a number, right? Like 1 for A, 2 for B, 3 for C. So instead of just writing out, hey, Bob, how's it going? You write, 1, 6, 3, 4, 8, right? So anybody who doesn't know the trick would just look at the paper and see a bunch of numbers, right? But the person that knows the trick starts reversing the numbers. Oh, we got a 3, that's a C. Oh, we got a 26, that's a Z, right? And they can like reverse it back. So one way that you could check to see if this were being used is when you look around and saw random numbers, you could start turning them back into letters and see if it spelled any messages. Do you see what I'm saying? If you're walking down the street and you saw like a number scrawled on a building, you could be like, I wonder if this is really an encoded message using the number to letter encryption, right? And you could like be like, all right, so it would say da da da. Now, most of the time, it would just produce a bunch of random letters. It wouldn't mean anything. But if you suddenly saw that those random numbers said like all hail Satan, you'd be like, someone wrote that using this technique on the wall. Because obviously the chances that someone just wrote a random number that happened to say all hail Satan is pretty unlikely. See what I'm saying? And then if you looked, you saw another random number on the wall and you did it again. And then suddenly you saw that said like, praise the dark one, cursed is Christ or something. You'd be like, look, yet again, we see an example of it. Someone's going around writing this around everywhere. So what that is to say is that if you understand how something gets encrypted, you understand how to decrypt it. If you know how something gets put into the code, then you can take something in the code and take it back out of the code into normal English, right? Or whatever language it's in. Okay, so once you understand the punchline technique, you can do that against things or weird facts in our society that seem to just be happening randomly. But when you get the punchline technique, you're like, look at it as if it's encrypted with the punchline technique and see what answer you get. And what will utterly terrify you to your core, actually, if you're a Christian, it might not because you already realize that Satan exists, is that the answers you will start getting are essentially like very legitimate answers that all have to do with evil. And like it starts producing very, very like basically excellent answers to like pretty much every problem that we have in the world today. And then you're like, wait a minute, how has it been framed in such a way that it's like encrypted with this weird technique? Because the technique hides it. It's a deceptive technique. It hides realities from people. And anywhere that you have some level of control where you can inject some information into reality, you can use this technique. Okay, so hold on, I just put my hat on because it's kind of cold in here. So I actually saw this before I got reborn, and when I started noticing it everywhere, I was like, dude, the only way this could be everywhere would be if there was some like evil group or some like evil entity or something that has like significant control over the world. And guess what? Not long after that, I got reborn because I realized there was, and his name was Satan. Okay, so forgive me, guys, if I don't go too long today with this video. I'm just a little drained, but I want to at least express it. Okay, so here is how the punchline technique works. To reveal it, I'm going to refer to a scenario that I told you guys about, and I'm going to show you how you could use the punchline technique to solve a problem that if you're correctly understanding the problem, it should seem like impossible. It should seem like that you're going to fail. But watch, I can solve it easily with the punchline technique. Here's the scenario. We're going to call this the warning letter game. And this is the scenario. In this scenario, we have a prominent New York Times journalist. Let's say his name is like Bob O'Hare, right? And he's working on a big story about the government, about the CIA, about like black ops, right? And he's on the verge of discovering some secret thing that's so secret that the government's going to kill him over it. Like, think he's like about to reveal like Epstein's real list, something like that, right? Somebody whose life really, it'd be plausible for them to find out their life was in danger. Somebody who, if they found that out, would be like, wouldn't be surprised. They would take precautions, right? So Bob O'Hare is working at the New York Times. He's working on some big story. He doesn't know it yet. He doesn't realize he's in danger, but he's like working on this story about the CIA, trying to reveal something. Doesn't quite realize how much danger he's in because he hasn't quite figured it out. But the government realizes that he's about to figure it out, and they're like, we're going to suicide him, right? We need to kill him, and we're going to do it like in the next week because he's like about to crack the case. He's getting really close. And we need to kill this dude. So the government's like, all right, let's put together the hit team, and let's like start following him, and let's like make it look like a suicide or whatever, and kill him in the next week or two. But now, and realize that this is a completely fictional scenario. I'm just using it to illustrate like how the deception technique works. Okay, so now here's what happens though. There's somebody inside the government who decides to warn journalist Bob at the New York Times. They're going to send him a letter, and they're going to tell him exactly what's happening. They're going to say, Robert O'Hare, you are in danger. As a result of your work on story, such and such, you're about to uncover a critical secret, and CIA group Alpha, whatever, has now been mobilized against you. Watch your back. They're going to move on you in the next 2 weeks. They might follow you. You may see, if you see cars behind you, like lay low. My advice, like get out of the country or just watch for them. They're going to move on you. Sincerely, like anonymous government source. And it's like a totally legit letter. It's even like typed out, like it's like completely legit looking, like written on a government computer and printed out by some insider. And it's completely legit. It just says to this dude, Bob O'Hare, watch out. They're going to kill you. This is from an insider. I can't tell you my name, but your work on your latest story is about to reveal it. They're going to move on you in 2 weeks. I don't know the exact date. You need to watch your back, like stop using your phone, like lay low for 2 weeks, until, otherwise you're going to die. Like sincerely anonymous government insider, right? That's the letter. So they take the letter out, they address it to Bob O'Hare, they mail it to Bob O'Hare, the journalist, right? And that's what it says. Totally legit looking letter, printed out on government stationery and everything. Anonymous insider, right? This gets mailed to Bob O'Hare. But now we're going to play what we call the game. Now we're going to say, what if you were allowed to intercept this letter before it got to the journalist Bob? Because obviously if he just gets the letter, what's going to happen? Well, he's going to kind of freak out. Even if he doesn't 100% believe it, he's at least going to like get a little worried, right? Because he knows he's working on a big story. And let's say he works in national security circles. So the idea, he's probably heard of someone that has been threatened by the government before. So it's like, if you don't get that scenario, imagine somebody who's reporting on like the drug cartels in Mexico, right? So somebody where if they got a warning like that, they'd be like, whoa, I better watch out, right? Well, let's just keep going with this scenario. He works for New York Times. He's like about to like uncover Epstein's list or something. So if he was just to get the letter, he would be worried. He may not completely believe it, but he'd at least be like, uh-oh, like this does not seem good, So this is the rules of the game. If he's at all worried, if he's at all paranoid, if he even suspects it, you lose the game. But this is how we play the game. We get to intercept the letter, and we cannot erase any information from it. We have the letter. We cannot blot out anything. All we can do is just add something else to it, right? So picture the letter for yourself. Picture a white letter like this with this typed out message in the middle. Robert O'Hare, you are in danger. Your investigative work on this has led a team to be activated to kill you. I can't tell you who I am. You need to lay low for the next 2 weeks. Watch out for like vans, like they have your phones tapped. Like if I were you, I would get out of town. Sincerely, inside source. Like, right? Typed out in the middle of the letter. Now, you get to intercept the letter. You cannot erase any of it. And in fact, you know what you get? A ballpoint pen. Click, click. All you can do is just scribble something on the letter. Write something, right? All you can do. And then you have to put it back in the envelope and mail it to Bob O'Hare so that he's going to get the warning plus whatever you scribbled next to it. Now, whatever you scribbled next to it has to make him so not believe the warning whatsoever that he is just essentially going to have no paranoia whatsoever, and he's just going to live his life as if he had never got the letter, and he's then going to get killed by the government. But if he's at all suspicious from that letter, you lose the game. Starting to understand how difficult this should be? Because what are you going to write? Don't believe this, or this was a mistake, or remember, you can't even cross anything out. You just have to write like, we meant Johnny O'Hare. Like, anything like that, it's going to be like, what the heck? He's going to feel very strange, right? What can we write in this letter, though, that will make him have no idea the government's about to kill him? This is where we use the punchline technique. And if you don't understand it from this example, don't worry. I have like 5 other examples. And if you don't get it from this one, how it works, and by the time I do about the 5th example, it's going to click in your brain. You're going to go like, oh, of course it would work. No wonder it works. This, before I give you the solution, this is like the game Satan has to play, because he can't erase this right here. He can't erase this here, creation. But what can he do? He can add stuff. He can add deceptive things. He can control governments. He can put things out there. So he can't erase the truth, but Satan is essentially playing the warning letter game. Do you see that? Like, God's trying to warn all of us, believe in the gospel, believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ before you die, or you're going to burn in hell for eternity. And Satan can't take away the gospel. He can't take away the warning letter, but he can add a little more information. And it has to be so deceptive that most people will die without even considering that Jesus could have been real. See that? And he's succeeding. Now, how is that even possible? Sure, he might trick some people, but the scripture tells us that most people are perishing. It says, broad is the way, wide is the road, and many therein that go therein. I forget the exact words, but narrow is the way, straight's the gate. Most people go in the broad road and get destroyed. Okay, so here's what we do with the letter. Ready? Click out your ballpoint pens, and we're going to completely blind Bob to the fact that he's about to be killed by the government. So this is what we do. On the first side of the letter, we're just going to write this, over, with like a little arrow. If you don't know what that means on a letter, it means turn the page over for more information. If you're not familiar with English letter writing customs, when you write over, it means flip over the page, there's more information. So, bottom of the letter, there's a warning. Bob, you're in your journalism, you're going to get killed. Watch out, they're moving against you because of this big story you're currently working on. We're just going to write over, right? Now we're going to flip the page over. And now we're going to write this with our ballpoint pen. Ha 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 ha. Be honest, Bob. Did I get you? Did I get you for a second? You like how I even typed it out with that official looking font and everything? Ha! I knew you wouldn't be easy to fool. Anyway, it's Freddie McAllister, from Northwestern, class of 84. I don't know if you remember me, but we had a couple classes together. We never really talked much, but I always looked up to you. That's why it didn't surprise me to see your name in the byline of that big story in the Times the other day. Old Bobby O'Hare, now a big-time journalist with the paper of record. Congratulations, Bob. You deserve it. Let's be honest. The way the world is these days, people getting dumber by the second. If I played this little joke on a lot of people, they probably would start breaking into a cold sweat every time they saw some random white van behind them. Ha ha ha. I even saw a study the other day that said that 32% of people believe that Elvis is still alive and the moon landing was all a huge conspiracy. Bob, I don't mean to blow smoke up your butt, but if I had to make a short list of people who definitely wouldn't fall for that kind of nonsense, even in today's crazy world, your name would be right at the top. You were just always so grounded, insightful. That's why it doesn't at all surprise me to see that you've really made it in life. And I'm not trying to hit on you or anything, but I saw your picture on the Times website, and I gotta say, you are holding up quite well. With your brains and those looks, I'm sure you must have found a real stunner by now. Probably married with some beautiful kids, the whole 9 yards. I haven't been so lucky myself. Anyway, if you're ever in the Seattle area and you want to grab a drink with an old pal, give me a call. Then we have some phone number, 618-703-66. Hope I gave you a good laugh with that one. Apologies if it was a bit twisted. And if I don't hear back from you, I understand. You must be a busy man. Keep up the great work, Bob. The world these days could use a few more sharp minds like yours. All the best, your old friend Freddie. P.S. Go Tomcats. And this is assuming that Bob really did go to Northwestern in the year 84 and that the Tomcats are the Northwestern team, right? That's what you add to the letter and send it out. Okay, now we're going to explain why this will work and why Bob is essentially going to have this reaction. He's going to look at the front of the letter and think, oh my God, could this, what are the over? He's going to flip it over and start reading it and go, See, that's the reaction he's going to have. Because the punchline technique is called that because it frames the truth as if it were the punchline to a joke. And for deep reasons that I'm not fully going to explain in one video, this is the best way to get the human brain to not perceive reality, is to shove the possibility instantly into the realm of the absurd, what would be like a punchline, okay? But now I'm going to explain a little bit about why this will work so well on Bob when he receives the letter. Because it takes advantage, just to mention a couple, of two core human drives. Because when Bob first gets the letter, his instant reaction is going to be panic. He sees what's written. He thinks, oh my God, could this be real? What do we all think when we first hear a threat or bad news? We're like, are you serious? You know, somebody says, so-and-so died of a heart attack. You say, are you kidding? Are you joking? Right? We're like, is this real? Right? So we have a desire for security, right? We have a strong emotional preference for good news over bad news. No one wants to spend time considering worst case scenarios, let alone a literal nightmare situation like the one that Bob is in. Remember, the government's really going to kill him. This is a real threat, right? So this letter, by what we add to it, presents a completely different scenario. An old friend, you know, sending a letter of congratulations, you know, right? There's no danger whatsoever in that scenario, right? So like, oh, it's just some old guy from college contacted me playing a joke. Right away, the mind much prefers that, right? That's why oftentimes when people are confronted with bad news, they say, are you serious? Are you kidding? Is this real? You look at reports of mass shootings. What do people say? Oh, it sounded like, I thought a bunch of balloons were going off, or it sounded like tables falling, because our minds don't first want to consider a nightmare scenario. This is part of what the punchline technique plays on, is it instantly says, nope, it's not that real scenario. Ha ha ha, that's a joke. It's this other scenario, which our brain is like, okay, much happier to think that, right? The next thing, though, that it takes advantage of is pride. Because it flatters the reader. It flatters Bob the journalist on multiple levels. And it links belief in the reality, i.e. the fact that he's actually going to get killed and that this is a real threat. It links that to something foolish, something silly that only an idiot would fall for. Because remember, we wrote that on the letter. If I played this joke on most people, they'd get all paranoid. But I knew you wouldn't, Bob, because you're sharp like that. See how we wrote that into the letter? So now, not only is Bob's desire for security like, it's just a joke. If I told you my dad just died, you're like, really? I'm like, just kidding, man. Sorry, it was my sixth sense of humor. People aren't going to be like, but really, did he die? But really? But tell me the truth. They're going to be like, oh, come on, man. That was a dark joke. See how people are quickly pulled into the less dangerous scenario? They don't need to be convinced of it because they want to believe it because it seems more likely even. It's, right? But also, so the letter flatters the reader on multiple levels. It links belief in the reality, which is that Bob's really about to get killed. The thing that he already doesn't want to believe because it's just terrifying and uncomfortable. It's like the worst news of his life, essentially, is getting this letter. Not only does it play for his desire of security, it plays for his pride because it says, only an idiot would fall for a joke, would take this kind of a thing seriously, but you're not like that. It then frames belief in the delusion as something flattering, something insightful, something rare, something to be proud of. Let me repeat that. The letter frames it so that if Bob were to take the threat on the front seriously, only an idiot would fall for this type of joke I just pulled on you, But then it flatters Bob about how he's insightful. And then we add in the letter, by the way, a lot of people, if they got this, they'd probably, freak out. Ha, what fools. So now Bob is not only been secure, but now his ego's being stroked. You wouldn't fall for this. And Bob's probably starting to kind of laugh and think, wow, he had me going there for a minute, just like we said in the letter, right? So reading the first side of the letter is going to cause an intense jolt of fear, anxiety, a terrible feeling, the pure horror of having to consider such a possibility. But as soon as the letter is turned over, the delusion instantly offers relief, calm, positive feelings. And then it offers praise. So naturally, the heart is going to have a strong desire to look further at the positive scenario, which is actually a delusion in this case. It's the deception right? Then the dread scenario. So right away, Bob's going to be like, okay, this isn't a real threat. Okay, this is just a joke. Thank God. He's not going to be like, keep thinking, but is it a threat? It's like, no, we have a whole explanation here of what it is. Okay, it's somebody playing a joke on me, right? The brain has a strong, what's called confirmation bias. He wants to prove that the less terrifying scenario, i.e. the delusion, is true. So his brain is going to start looking for details to confirm that the delusion, that he's not in danger, is true. He's not going to start looking for things to confirm the threat's true because he doesn't want to believe that. And just like I said, when you call someone up and say, man, my parents got killed in a car accident, and they're like, oh my God, really? And then you're like, just messing with you. They don't like sit there pressing you for 20 minutes. No, did they really get killed? Tell me the truth. Did they get killed? They're just like, you got me. See how right away they believe that, nope, it's just a joke, because you don't want to believe the bad thing. There's confirmation bias, right? So naturally, the heart is going to have a strong desire to look further at the positive scenario than the dread scenario. A confirmation bias kicks in because it so much wants the delusion to be true and is more than happy to dismiss the initial bad feeling scenario. So then, when a little bit of evidence is sprinkled in confirming it, such as when Bob's going to think, I did go to Northwestern in 84, which is obviously something we can just look up about Bob and find out. Anyone knows, but Bob's going to think, oh yeah, I was at Northwestern in 84, right? Then he's going to think, yeah, I was a bright student back then, because we make reference to that in the letter, right? Which we could just guess he probably was, right? He's going to think, yeah, I actually was sharp then. There were some people that look up to me. Yeah, I was there. So right away, he's going to think, this scenario makes sense, right? My name has been in a bunch of bylines and articles lately, so of course somebody might write to me, right? So it's notice that the idea that there's a random guy from 40 years ago named Freddie who is in some class with me that I never really talked to, that I don't really remember, but he saw my name in some story the other day and wrote me this letter, seems like totally plausible. Do you remember the names of every person you went to school with 40 years ago? And notice in the letter we even referenced that. You might not remember me, Bob. We just had a couple classes together, never really talked to you much, but see, we framed that in the letter, right? So Bob's like, right? Now, the brain is happy to accept that these little bits of evidence are enough to confirm the general frame of the delusion, i.e. that this is not a real threat letter, that it is a joke from some old guy back in Northwestern. Oh, yep, I did go to Northwestern. Oh, yeah, I was bright back then, right? Notice the crucial deception, and this is so crucial, the punchline technique. It happens right at the beginning. It happens immediately. It's before you think about it. It's before you process it. It's right at the beginning you get thrown off. It's like, nope, that was just a joke. Don't consider that. Now put all your mental resources into considering the delusion. And then we're going to see how now it really starts to work in overdrive of how well this works, right? So the critical deception happens right at the beginning, before there's any time to overcome the initial fear reaction and start thinking critically about the actual threat. Right? So right away, it's like, nope, before your brain starts to get over that shock and be like, okay, the government's going to kill me. I got to stop using the phone. Should I tell my wife and kids? Should I take them with me? Before you have any time to even consider, why is they going to kill me? Is it this story I'm working on? Does this have to do with what that guy said to me a month ago? Before your brain has any time to start going there, right away, we punchline them. Nope, that was just a joke. But either way, Freddie McAllister from Northwestern, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, the initial deception happens very quickly. There's no time to really consider it. It takes advantage of the fact that the brain wants security and it likes this pride, and it's much happy to be given a non-threatening explanation. And then, now notice the next technique that the punchline technique here employs. All right, so before there is any time to overcome the initial fear reaction and start thinking critically about the actual threat, the next thing that the letter uses is misdirection. Why? because the letter raises intriguing questions within the deceptive scenario. Did I really have a classmate named Freddie McAllister? The recipient is going to start thinking back to random people they knew in college. Is this Fred from economics class? No, that was Fred Jennings. Could it have been that tall, quiet guy who was kind of creepy and kept bumping into me at parties? Or was it that guy that I had a profound conversation with that night I hooked up with Megan Smith, the cheerleader? Was his name Freddie? Right? Note how the misdirection adds another layer of intrigue. Is this guy hitting on me? Because we mentioned the thing in the letter about Bob, you look kind of handsome, right? Is this guy hitting on me? Is he gay? Maybe it's just some random gay guy who made up the whole thing about being my old classmate, right? Maybe it's kind of some like gay fan or gay stalker just sent me this letter, right? Like, do I have a secret admirer? Right? So notice how these questions are intriguing to consider, because right away the guys might think this, did I really have a Freddie McAllister? Is this guy gay? Is he hitting on me? Right? But notice that they're non-threatening. The idea that some random gay guy sent you some fan mail or whatever, not really threatening. Not as threatening as the government's about to kill you, right? So now we've shifted the brain and misdirected it into considering what are worthless questions within the delusion that mean nothing as a way to not let the brain consider the initial scenario. So it's like punchline, misdirect, look at this, and then you just stay stuck in that, okay? So the brain is happy to sit there thinking about this stuff. Sitting there thinking about how the government's about to kill you is very painful. It's horrific. It torments your mind. You do not want to think about that. So the punchline technique has now said, no, that was just the punchline to a joke. Ha ha ha. Did I get you? Here's the real scenario. Here's some questions. Do you have a gay admirer? Did you know a Freddie from school? Is this guy hitting on you, or does he really disrespect you? The brain's happy to think about those questions because they're not that threatening. You might even mention it to your wife. Hey, I got this crazy letter today. I think I might have a gay admirer, honey. Well, see what I'm saying? The brain's happy to think about that stuff. Just like you don't want to consider, is hell really real? Are we really going to go there if we don't believe in Jesus? No, Satan's like, no, we're all here to learn spiritual lessons, and there's many ways. And consider, but have you heard about the new way to get a six-pack at the gym? Yeah, and have you heard about that new meditation where you ring the bell? Yeah, look at that stuff. Brain's happy to consider that stuff because that stuff doesn't involve burning in a lake of fire for eternity. So see how this punchline technique is like, see how it's linking to the Bible? If you don't see yet, just keep going. I have a lot more. Okay, so anyway, finally, and look at another layer of this technique of how ingenious this is. Guys, I didn't invent the punchline technique. I just kind of discovered it. Like Satan invented it from what I can tell. Actually, that's a lie. God invented it because you then see him use it on Satan at the crucifixion, which is hilarious. I'm sure it wasn't for Satan. But check this out. So now look at this. Note how the letter then predisposes the mind of the recipient to dismiss any future evidence they encounter of the reality. So this is where it starts to get really genius, because think about this. What is, after reading this letter, right, what is Bob's reaction going to be 3 days later if he's driving along and he looks in his rearview mirror and he thinks for a second, has that white van been following me? How's he going to react? Do you know human character enough? He's going to crack up and go, yeah, freaking Freddie and his letter. He's probably going to laugh and think, oh man, if he hadn't written the letter on the back, I probably would be worried about that van. Ha 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 ha. And what's going to happen? He's not going to notice that the van really is following him and killing him. Because as he encounters evidence of the truth, the punchline technique has set up his brain to perceive it as something else. So, evidence for the reality is now going to be reinterpreted as evidence supporting the delusion. And the more evidence he encounters for the reality, the punchline technique has essentially poisoned his initial frame of reference so that now when he encounters evidence for the reality, he will think that it's evidence for the delusion. So if he thinks he sees someone following him, whereas if he hadn't even received the warning, he might think, is that guy following me? Now he's going to think, oh man, I am a little paranoid after that letter. Man, Freddie almost gave me a heart attack. Second, I thought that guy was following me. See how it works? It's pre-poisoned his mind so that as he encounters evidence of the truth, he's now that's just going to dismiss it more and more, which is exactly what Satan has done to our entire culture with the gospel. Okay, but let's keep going. So the deception actually uses reality, specifically the very reality that it is trying to conceal, to reinforce belief in the delusion. All right. Once the deception is in place, the deceiver does not need to make any attempt to conceal discovery of future evidence of the reality, because it will actually serve to make the target more confident in their delusion. Do you get how that works? Because now if Bob notices little things behind him, he's just going to think that that's like a sign that he's getting paranoid, which the letter kind of warned him about. I hope I didn't give you a heart attack, Bob. You know, most people who, by the way, are dumb, they'd get paranoid if they saw a white van. Bob's going to be like, oh, man, and he's going to feel kind of nervous. All right, guys, I got to stop the video here. I will speak with you soon for the next part. In Jesus' name.